Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andrea Ricci, and I'm pleased to be here with you and two distinguished colleagues for one of the series of a discussion which is taking place in the Rebalance project. Today's theme is living, working, and shopping patterns. The whole idea is to understand how the current dynamics can actually be interpreted in the perspective of the future evolution of mobility and of the values and the cultural aspects behind it. We have the pleasure of having with us today Cristina Marolda and Alain Lostis. Hello, both of you. Cristina is a former policy officer of the European Commission. She has a background that was trained as an architect, and she spent many years at the European Commission in the transport area, and specifically in being in charge of the research and innovation aspects of the European Commission transport programs in DG Move. She's now working, she's formally retired, but not really, as she keeps being very active always in this field as an independent expert. And in particular, she is particularly versed on issues related to transport and gender issues and inclusivity and inclusion themes. Welcome, Cristina. Alain Lostis is a research director at the Université Gustave Eiffel, formerly IFSTAR, formerly something else. He has a PhD in spatial planning, and this is the core of his professional interests. He is particularly involved in research dealing with geographical distances, accessibility, and the so-called transit-oriented development. So I think that both of you have a direct experience and interest in the very theme that we are dealing with today, which has to do with the accessibility in a way and of a variety of activities and services, and how we plan to move around to get to those. A few words about the project for those of you who are not familiar. Rebalance is a project funded by the European Commission within Horizon 2020, and it is a foresight project. Of course, it's not the first or even possibly the largest foresight project in the transport area, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. The idea is to focus on, to go a little bit beyond what has been the discussion and the discourse on transport foresight so far, and to deal with the deep roots that end up by determining, you know, both behaviors on the demand side and the policy decisions on the other. So looking at the values and the underlying culture that actually feeds into decisions and behaviors. It's not an easy task because values and culture are subject to very diverse interpretation according to you know, countries, people, demographics, and time as well. But we're trying to concentrate on a number of interesting aspects, and this series of dialogue, of which this one is the fifth, directly aimed at feeding into the scenario building that Rebalance is going to develop in the next step, which means that what we are really interested, beyond the pleasure of having an interesting conversation with qualified people, what we're really interested in is trying to identify the key factors, again, with a focus on culture and values, that are likely to play a role, or that we would think that should play a role in a future evolution of mobility systems. So the rules of the game for this session are very simple. I will moderate it, asking questions to our two speakers, and we will interact in a fairly loose way and a free way. Participants are not in a position to take the floor, but you are welcome to ask questions with the dedicated Zoom facility on the bottom of your screen, and we will try to monitor these questions and take some up if and when deemed useful. Okay, so a few words now on the specific background for this topic today. So living, working, and shopping patterns. I think it's obvious to everyone that they are changing in Europe and abroad. And in changing, they are transforming the urban context, or maybe the other way around, or maybe both. Clearly, ICT technology is playing a very important role. It permeates our life, and now the buzzword of smart this and smart that seem to be dominating the landscape of all our economic and leisure-related life. And to some extent, it seems like smart options, so-called smart options, are becoming the first choice, the default option for lots of people, whether we like it or they like it or not, but it seems to be happening. The expected outcome or effect of this, or at least the advocated effect, is that this will allow us to save time and increase efficiency. We would like to question this today, to understand whether this is really corresponding to reality, and if we can draw some kind of consensus around this. Now, on top of this, of course, it's difficult to discuss any possible subject today without talking about COVID and the pandemic. So we'll have to touch upon this also because it clearly plays and is playing a role in accelerating this kind of change, or at least apparently accelerating it. And so clearly, whether it's here to stay or not, we will hopefully also discuss it. Having said that, even before the pandemics, I think that these trends of smartization, if you wish, and of changing patterns were somehow already there, and maybe we can consider that they reflect more structural changes which were already visible even before the pandemics. So the implications of this are clearly far-reaching, even beyond the immediate impact on the transport sector. They affect urban form, they affect infrastructure requirements. I'm sure Christina will be happy to comment on this, given her background. What is particularly important for us is that they affect or are related to interact with the dynamics of basic values such as equality, opportunities, and other ethic-related, I would say, aspects which are clearly affected or play a role. Again, it might be one way or the other or both. So that's the overall background for our discussion today. Let me jump in the meat of the dialogue and start with some questions. So my first question I'd like to put to both of you is about the urban model, if one can accept the idea of an urban model. And what we'd like to delve into is what are the real needs, aspiration, wishes of society for what concerns urban model and its dynamics. And in particular, of course, I think I should consider the perception and the aspirations of the younger generations, because they are the ones who will play a more active role and will be more engaged in the process of dynamics. I was trying to, categorize a little bit the possible models that one can look at, and I came up with four basic options, if you wish. The first one is the so-called suburban dwelling. So people are happy to live away from the city center because it's quiet. You've got more space, both indoor and outdoor. That's one type of aspiration. The other, exactly the opposite, there's the model which is based on the pleasure of living in where the action is. So the dwelling in the city center, in the inner city, with specular advantages and disadvantages with respect to the previous model. So less space, but more action, and if you enjoy it. No, I cannot hear you. Alain, you're muted.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Then there's a third, these are two fairly classical ways of looking at urban model. Then there's something which is, propping up now, and which is those, what I would call the return to nature, the rural escape. So rejection of city altogether and trying to find a completely different context for our life. And finally, I think we ought to mention here something which has been pretty much in the spotlight lately with some decisions of cities, in particular Paris, the so-called 15-minute cities, which inherently, when we talk about very large city, entails the idea of having a multi-center, multinodal city with a distribution of attractors in more than one hub, with a completely different type of accessibility pattern and movement pattern. So I came up with this four. I don't know, you may have others in mind, but my first question, and let me start with Christina. Do we have enough visibility of what is happening to understand what are the truest and the more genuine aspirations of our fellow citizens, in particular about the young, with respect to these four roughly described models? Christina.
Oh, yeah, Andrea. I think that we have to make a number of distinctions about what we talk. First of all, I would like just to say one thing. I do not like to talk about smart mobility or smart transport, because we used to say that everything digital, smart is digital, which should imply that digital is smart, which is not always the case. So I would like to specify that smart is smart and digital is digital. They can be put together, but not necessarily. And I think that looking at which are the trends and the aspirations, we have to look at the generations. And I think that every generation has a different pattern, if you want. You talk about the youngsters. Okay, let's leave apart the baby boomers, who are no longer, except me, in the productive group. But I mean, so they can rely on something more quiet, more distant. So they have more time to commute or to move from one place to the other. So there is no problem. But also among the youngsters, we have at least 2 or 3 different generations. There are the millennials, the Z generation, and we cannot talk yet about what will be the generation Alpha, but they are there and they will be there very soon. So I think that between the millennials and the Z generation, there is already a quite big difference. Millennials are more participative, if you want. They are for direct democracy. They feel they have a certain awareness for environment. They are flexible because they know that they cannot have one job in their lives, and they tend to adapt. They are digital enough to work remotely, and they are looking for some nature. I think that the trend of this generation is really to be with space around them. That is not really the inner city, their environment. Whereas the Z generation are really the digital natives, and they socialize virtually. They are really dependent from digital equipment. So they are used to work, to shop, to communicate. And I would say they could live wherever. They don't care. They can live in city centers. They could live in the most remote up mountain or in a small city, because their physical environment is not so important for them. And I don't think that is a positive aspect of this generation. And maybe what we have to do is really to find what could be an incentive to escape their isolation with internet. So try to understand which are really the aspects that could stimulate these people to socialize physically again.
Okay, so in fact, what you're saying is that the digital natives don't feel like they need to have roots on the territory, because they can move around and change dwelling and change habits and change jobs, or they will have to maybe even if they don't, and therefore they are free flow.
Yes, if you want. Yes, yes, yeah.
Alain, what's your take on this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Christina, for Andrea as well, for animating this session, and Christina for these inputs. Yeah, I like the distinction you make between the generations, but maybe going back to the millenniums, there are some evidence that's shown that they wanted to settle in the inner cities, but there was no space left for them, not enough space, and they couldn't afford this especially in the USA. They were kind of forced, or they were not going to the periphery so happily, but they didn't have the opportunity to go elsewhere, some of them. So so it's a point. And the other point about what you say about the lack of need for location for the younger generation, I would like to refer maybe to to studies about the use of cars by the younger generations. And the use of cars is very interesting to study, because it reveals what are the expectations, what are their views on transport, mobility, and what they do, and the younger generation, and into this younger generation, it's more the millenniums. We know about those who were born around the start of the century, late 20th century and early 21. It's difficult to understand what they want, what they expect. But one of the explanation that to me makes sense is, apart from many other explanation, is instead of putting many efforts on owning a car, this kind of switch to something else, which may involve having access to a car, but not as it's not anymore the main driver, and it's replaced by something else. We don't know exactly, but maybe it's the proposal that was made by sociologists was that it's accessing the social network, so, and accessing physically. They want to meet their friends. And so I'm a bit puzzled by your proposal, in the sense that they want to physically meet their friends. I mean, when they move, they want to meet.
The millennials, not the Z generation. I made the distinction between the two.
Okay, so we don't have yet maybe the younger generation. We don't know. We don't have the empirics, but yeah. For this, I don't have the empirics for the attitude towards cars. So this may change. We don't know. But we had this, the social network, the meeting people. Meeting people is as a value, and this meeting people aspect is something you can more easily do in cities, instead of, as you said, in the remote mountains, or you go vacation. But it's more difficult. So. Yeah, okay. So it was just my reactions to your inputs, Christina. So yes. Do you want me? Christina, you want to
Well, actually, I'm sure that Christina wants to react to that, but let me also somehow complement my initial question with what we'd like to try and figure out, or at least imagine, is to what extent the adoption of one or the other models or formulas is driven by a number of things that are already happening, like, for instance, digitalization or constraints of an economic nature, etc., or the other way around? Or is there, together with, for instance, increased awareness of the climate change and awareness in the younger, is there an autonomous and an intrinsic movement and change of aspirations that will itself be determining changes in how mobility is organized? I mean, I know it's probably both, but it's difficult to say whether it's going only one way or only the other one. But is there a chance that something is happening in the culture and consciousness, awareness and motivation, I would say ethical, intrinsic motivation of people, especially of young people, that is really going to be the change factor? Christina, you want to maybe react
so.
to Alain also, or yeah, go ahead.
No, I think so. And in fact, you are anticipating a question that I wanted to put to Alain. We do not know enough what millennials and other generations, do we ever listen to them? Do we ever involve them in our discussion? I know that it's not easy because, I mean, they try to separate from the elder generations, but I think that there should be a different attitude and a different openness of mind to try to understand their wishes, because we tend to put their requests or their behaviors into our standard patterns, and they are going another way, and we cannot follow them. That is my impression. I may be completely wrong.
Agree with this, Alain?
I mean, I wish I could have a good answer to this question. I wish I could. I wish I could, but I can't. So I'm really formatized. I don't know how to say it, by the fact that I study mobility, and the only thing I really see is when people move, when they don't move, when they move or when they don't. But if as a poet says, the life is elsewhere, I couldn't say where things happen. What we know, what we observed is something really strange and not very positive. Is in the most recent mobility survey in France, something is changing, and the change is the younger, so those who were 15 years old in 2018, 2019. So they were born in 2005, around this time. We observed that they stopped or they reduced their mobility for leisure.
Absolutely.
And that's really puzzling.
Yeah.
Because it's typically the mobility that you can expect for meeting friends. So that's effectively something we observed. But if we can say this, it's exactly because we keep our old grid to understand reality. So we have ages, cohorts, ages, sorry, and we look at where do they move, if they move, and we miss. We don't know why they do this. We can imagine that maybe they're behind a screen online, and this was before the pandemic. So I wish I could tell you, but I'm not the best I don't have enough information about all this, and I think it's a call for research, and I fully appreciate. We're trying in our project to we're dedicating efforts, Andrea. We're dedicating efforts in a project to get the views from the younger generation. It's not easy. It's a really difficult task, and it's a challenge. And my feeling is we're trying. We're doing efforts. Maybe not the best. Maybe not the efforts. Maybe we could do it better in better ways, but in different ways. But we're really trying to do it.
Thank you, Alain. Moving on, I'd like to open now there's often an attempt to discuss whether the concept of convenience is compatible or fully compatible, at least with the idea of comfort. Now, I'd like to open the discussion by saying, I have the feeling that what is being sold to us as convenience is nothing different from efficiency. In fact, whether at the individual level or at the collective level or at the level of some individuals or some groups of individuals, maybe less for others, what is masked by the term convenience, to my mind, is basically the ever increasing chasing up for increasing of efficiency. So my question would be, to what extent this pursuance of efficiency at all costs, I would say, is at the expense of other fundamental values and aspirations. And this is, again, something which can be asked both at the individual level, where what might be sacrificed through an increased attention to efficiencies is individual comfort. Is that true? Or can we make those compatible? Are there trade-offs? But even more importantly, at the level of society as a whole, because I think efficiency is I mean, I remember it was, I think, in the late 90s, in the beginning of the year 2000, so where the first green paper on transport from the European Commission, or maybe it was not the first one, but certainly one of the most important, was called Fair and Efficient Pricing. It was about pricing, but the idea was to combine efficiency with fairness. I mean, fairness is a term that is somehow a proxy also for reducing inequalities, for better accessibility. So there is the idea that these two concepts, efficiency and fairness, if you wish, need to be, you need trade-offs, that you need to make a stand on what is your priority, and if you want both, then you need to water down a little bit the absolute ambitions that you could have by concentrating on only one and the other. So is that true, or is this a false problem? Can we actually pursue simultaneously and with full success both convenience or efficiency and comfort and fairness? Alain, would you like to start there?
Okay, yeah. So trying to be at a level of reflection where we don't, we're trying to really go to the roots of what we see. I've been working on distance, as you said, Andrea, when you presented my background, and in my reflection, I observed that any movement in cities, in space, in geographical space, any movement is an optimization, is optimizing resources involved in movement. It can be money, sure, but it can be time, it can be other parameters. But there was a literature on excess commuting. So people who do too much commuting, and we're trying to identify those who travel too much and how to identify them and then to find why they do. I don't believe in this. I think there's no such thing as excess commuting, because if you commute, if you move, you optimize, and you like, or you're obliged to do this. It's not that you want to move more than you should, or than you want. So if we follow this logic, people optimize their movement. When you choose where you live, or you find where to work, or you choose where you buy things, it's always optimum. It's an optimum. And then, if we follow this, we need to integrate the resources consumed for the movement, and it leads us to carbon budgets. So we need to put into the movement itself the parameters of the movement. I hope I'm clear. So it's about convenience. It's about convenience and comfort. And behind your question, Andrea, behind this issue of convenience and comfort, it's a bit the idea that this movement could be avoided or could be made with less consumption of resources, of CO2 and so on. And I would like maybe to follow this idea of optimization and to say into the movement, if we tell people, if people understand that they are consuming carbon, and if they better understand what is their consumption of carbon and put a price on it, I'm not an economist, but put a price on it, maybe it would be a way to put some more fairness into movement from individuals.
Mm-hmm. I've seen lots of funny faces from Christina while you were talking, so I'm sure she wants to.
I love this optimistic vision of Alain. I really adore it. But I mean, I think that Alain, you are a fantastic planner in an utopistic world, because you imply that you have a freedom of choice. Freedom of choice for housing, freedom of choice of working, freedom of choice of transport means. And that is not the case, not for everybody, and not even for the transport system, because you might have commuters that are obliged to have 3 or 4 connections to reach their obliged point of work, for example. I'm not talking about movement for leisure or free time. I'm talking about the necessary movements. I mean, from A to B, to work, to find food, to go to the hospital, and to care for other people, and so on and so forth. And I'm afraid that this optimization is not an individual choice. The individual choice is to choose among the possibilities that the system offers, but the system is not always optimal.
Alors, just to complete, and it's good that we have this dialogue. I hope we're not boring our audience, but I like it. That's already a point. When I say optimization, it can be from an individual point of view, but it also can be optimized from the outside, from the planning. Introduce new transport systems, or favor different transport systems from the public authority. So this optimization process is not only an individual process. So,
yeah, of course. Okay.
It's broader.
So what is the bottom line of this? That the difficulty is not so much in combining convenience and comfort, but it is in reconciling the individual interests with the collective interests and with the idea of using an optimized transport system, not only to increase efficiency, but to make sure that, like it's fashionable to say today, nobody's left behind, and that nobody is coming out with a loss, individual loss, to allow for the achievement of the so-called collective benefits. The contradiction seems to be there rather than in the intrinsic difficulty of combining comfort with convenience. So would you agree with that, Christina?
I think so. In fact, I would talk about social sustainability together with the environmental one, because when we talk about sustainability, we immediately think about environment, but we have a sustainability for society, and of course we have also a sustainability for the economic system. So I think that trying to find the trade-off among these three aspects of sustainability, we could reach a better optimization. I mean, I follow Alain in his thinking, but I mean, we can go farther in that. And of course, that implies also a top-down activities, and that is done also with awareness campaigns. And what you said, I mean, the social norms and the social models are very important. You see, I mean, I think that nobody now would even imagine to smoke in a cinema because it is considered to be really uncivilized. And when the idea of taking your SUV to bring your child to school in a jammed traffic lane will be considered as an insult to society, nobody will do that any longer. So I think that really the mindset of people should change a little bit.
Okay.
And I like the idea of, is it about education, awareness, because it seems that those people who do things we would like to avoid in cities, they are not conscious of
Yeah.
Okay,
we could improve this by raising awareness. How? I don't know.
Okay, so I hinted at the issue of equalities or inequalities, if you wish. Let's try to delve a little bit more into that. And you know that now there's almost a mainstream term of mobility injustice or transport injustice, which is nothing new in terms of its substance, but the awareness of this phenomenon is certainly on the rise, and I think it's high time it is on the rise. So where does this debate come from? Well, it's obvious that particularly for what concerns commuting, long commuting times, and particularly which affect in a very differentiated way different socioeconomic groups. With another term which has become fashionable, which is in terms of kinetic elites. You know, the fact that there are privileged groups that take advantage of their wealth and of their socioeconomic status to skip some of the difficulties that are unavoidable for people belonging to less affluent or less privileged social groups. So this is maybe one of the most visible dimension of the so-called transport injustice, but there are other, obviously, inequality risks. Now, the way I'd like to look at this is to put on the table the discussion on what has been a mantra for such a long time, which is that urban density was the concept which was, put forward as the panacea, as the solution of all problems, because it facilitates, it shortens travel times, it facilitates accessibility, and I think that even in the community of fairly evolved transport specialists, this concept and this mantra of urban density still has a lot of traction. I personally am quite skeptical about this. Of course, we know that urban sprawl is bad, and therefore cities that are more dense in principle should entail less urban sprawl, and this would have to go in the right direction in terms of, once again, efficiency. I wonder whether it also goes in the direction of better comfort, of course. So I would provocatively ask this question: Can we actually deconstruct this dogma of the urban density as the solution to everything, which goes hand in hand with the opposite dogma, which is that urban sprawl is the culprit of everything, of all evils. Maybe we should look at this with a new perspective. I always mention the example of solar PV roofs. It's a very specific aspect, which has nothing to do with transport, but which somehow shows that urban density has some significant drawbacks. If you want to bet on electricity generated by PV, so photovoltaic panels, and they want to install photovoltaic panels on the roofs of everybody in a city, the denser the city and the highest the buildings, the less room for installing PVs you have, while you maximize the possibility of generating clean energy through solar PV if you have the widest possible sprawl. So this is an extreme example, but I think it's interesting because it shows that it's not a one-way type of discussion, and that we should have the courage of putting it on the table, although we are aware of the fact that changing completely some of the patterns that are now deeply ingrained would mean spending a huge amount of money in restructuring the whole territory of our cities. But let's leave it. Let's leave this aspect aside for a while. Let's try to discuss about again values and aspirations. Who would like to start discussing this issue of transport injustice associated to urban density and so on? Anna, you want to start?
Sure. I have so much to say. I'd like to start with one observation. I was lucky enough to read the IPCC, so the International Panel on Climate Change report, the last report, the report that should arrive, be public, or is it public now? It's already public. So I've been through this report, and we know that this report is really made by very smart people, smart in the sense that Christina said earlier. So they are state of the art of what we should, of the diagnostic of what is happening on the climate, but also what we should do. And when I read this, and especially on the city part, because they talk about cities, how cities should evolve if we want to tackle, if the policymakers want to tackle this climate change. And what surprised me is there's no alternative to density, to this idea of cities that should not sprawl more, and should, if we want to accommodate more people in cities, should become more dense than they are now. Density, transit, so public transport, and because I hear what you say, Andrea. I mean, we hear the critics. And last week I was at a meeting. I was at a virtual meeting, virtual conference with Chinese colleagues, that show empirics saying more density does not mean less car use. So that's puzzling. We have empirics that really put density into question, urban density into question. But on the other hand, there's no alternative. there's no alternative. So it's just a remark. And to come back to all the issues you mentioned, and going back to the long commuting, the kinetic elite and the inequalities in mobility. So is okay, because it's relevant to discuss this in the background of urban density. The people who commute more than 2 hours per day, they're not. We have the kinetic elite in this. We have some of them who belong to the kinetic elite. Possibly they choose to travel that much, but we have also the low income. I refer to Vincent Gesselin and Ravalet study in. They made an analysis of a qualitative analysis of long commuters, low income professionals in Lyon, Brussels, Genève in 2016, and these people they're far from their jobs because the land pressure, they can't afford to live closer to their jobs, but they also are in job insecurity. So there's also a part of a choice to stay away because they're not sure they will keep this job. And this is also why they don't invest in being closer. So so there's people who travel a lot, and these people possibly it's a me. When I say choice, it's not freedom of choice, and I mean it's not the idea of freedom of choice. There is a part of choice in these practices, and maybe there are some things changing, and things may change in the future around these long commutes, around the value of time. So you know, Andrea, when we started to prepare this discussion, you wanted to focus on the value of time, and it's a topic I know a little bit because I've been publishing on this topic with colleagues from economics, and we observe that in the typical economic approach, the time you spend while traveling is lost. Is just lost. It's only a cost. You just you pay, and the value of time tells you that the more you're paid hourly by your employer, the more you pay your time traveling. Yeah. And this is very robust because it explains a lot of it. You can model what's happening in mobility, so it's very, very robust. But what we observe is ICT use while traveling, especially in public transport and in trains. And we've been counting with my colleagues Bouni, Hadoué, and Koning, based on value of travel time in Paris, of people who use their mobile phone basically while in the regional train, and this reduced by 12% the value of travel time. So it's an abstract value, but it means there is an impact. There is something happening when you move and you do something else than movement activity. So on your mobile phone, like accessing your whatever, it can be professional, it can be not professional, it can be different kind of activities. But when you do this, your value of travel time is reducing. And there was a roundtable by the OCDE in 1.5 years ago that was provocatively entitled "Zero Value of Time for Traveling," which means that if we follow this logic, and as I said, this logic is very robust, it could mean traveling forever because it does not cost you nothing. because when you travel, you do activities that provide you some benefits. So why shouldn't you just move forever? Move very long. You won't move forever because it's absurd. But what's happening in what people do while traveling is pushing to more longer commutes. So it is not good news if we commute with CO2 consuming modes, but that's not all the transport modes are CO2 intensive, and train can be not so much CO2 intensive. So it's not all for cars, but the big problem of the autonomous car is if the autonomous car emerge significantly, I would say, this is something with problem, because people in their autonomous cars will have a very low value of time if they can watch a movie or sleep or send their emails while traveling, and the employers know this. So the employers could even start to consider this time is working time. And things are happening in France in this direction, where the public employer starts to consider that people who commute with train could have spent less time at the office, the public employers. So that's really so this tells us that there are forces that could support people living very far away from their jobs. And I've not even begun to talk about telework and the pandemic, which is other very, very strong pushing effect. And you need, Andrea, you know me, so you need to tell me when I should stop talking.
Oh yeah, but well, let's make it lively, and let's interact a little bit now with Christina, maybe, and then you'll take the floor again. Just as an immediate reaction, because I want to be also provocative. Your reflection on value of time still seems to be pretty much rooted in the concept of efficiency. And that's my question. I mean, is the value of time, do we have inevitably to gear the value of the time we spend traveling to productivity, to efficiency, sending emails, doing something with your iPhone? Couldn't it be that we're just looking out of the window and enjoying the landscape, for instance, or things like that? And so let me just put a little stone in your path. And Christina, do you want to say a few things, and then I'll give you the floor back?
Yes, no, I follow completely what Alain says, but I'm afraid I do not agree, especially today, because I don't know if you remember, Andrea, something that I wrote some years ago in 2014, and that was an article on urban nomads, the new nomads.
Yeah.
People that skip ownership and is ready to move from one place to the other just with a laptop and a toothbrush. And this was the model until a couple of years ago. We cannot avoid thinking at the effect of the pandemics. I think that the pandemics has changed completely our way of life for a limited period, but I think with a longer impact. First of all, we have reevaluated the value of personal time, time for leisure, time for family, time for nothing, as you said, Andrea. So maybe just looking out of the window because there is a wonderful sunset. And I think that is important. And we have slowed down. Thank God, I add. Thank God we have slowed down all our activities. We were hysterical about being always on the move, always doing something, always producing, replying to emails in real time, doing everything, 10 tasks at one time. We have slowed down. Or maybe I'm talking as a person that is growing older. I slow down, but I feel a completely different quality of life now. And it is much more relaxed. I enjoy things. I put things in perspective. I can select priorities. And that is also thanks to the lockdown and the pandemics. And I think it is important. And so the long commuting times, is that still something that is acceptable? Maybe, if it is not daily. And I go again to the choice of younger people to live outside the city, maybe in the countryside, because they can work remotely and being on the commuting time once a week or twice a week. And that is affordable because they can do something else in this time. But I think that and again, I think that we have to make a quite strong division and separation between the intellectual work and the manual work, because I mean, intellectuals or office workers can surely afford to work on the train and to send emails and whatsoever. Other people that are the normal labor force, they do not have this kind of possibility to have their time considered as working time. If you have to clean an office, you have to be there from 9 to 5 because you are cleaning, or from 5 to 9 maybe. That is more the working time for cleaners. So I think we always think about our bourgeois center optics. And it is not correct. We really should try to put ourselves in the shoes of other people that do not have our privileges. And well, to go again, I mean, that is just my provocations put there. And another one is the density. I think that we must overcome the paradigm of density in cities, because that is no longer viable. I mean, we saw that. I mean, the pandemic imposed the social distancing, and people have started thinking, you say the pandemics will pass, at a certain point will end. We will have another one. We will have to live with this sort of attention to our health in a different way. And I saw how, for example, here in Brussels, but also in Italy, the estate market has grown up exponentially. So against the lack of ownership, because you wanted to be mobile in order to follow your job and your interest, now people are trying to buy houses, and buy houses with a garden. So that is not the model of the compact city. And I think that density should also be balanced by free space and green spaces. So if you concentrate some activities, you have to lose some free land between them. And I'm thinking at one of the recent experiences in the Netherlands, that was the collaborative cities. I mean, the Netherlands is one of the most dense populated country in Europe, and they planned to have small cities with all the services needed, except the big ones, connected to each other with fast connections, with fast transport for the most important one, the services that are like universities, airports, big hospitals, and so on, that you cannot decentralize everywhere. So I think I was fascinated by this model, and I think that it deserves a further study to see how applicable it is. I know that for sure it could be applicable in Italy, because we have a number of small cities that are not so far away from each other, and maybe in France, except Ile-de-France and Paris, of course, where the density is a bit different.
And I will cut you off, but I'm sure you have more to say about this.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy that Christina says this, and I completely agree with especially the development, the later developments, because I wanted to develop a little bit on this, Andrea, if you let me, but it's just, you say countryside, house with a garden, if you can afford it, yes, but not everyone will afford this, can afford this. And you, of course, emphasize that we may be biased by looking at our homologues instead of and avoid and not be able to understand correctly what's happened for the not so well off. But maybe the not so well off, they will continue to live the way they lived before the pandemics, and some will afford to live differently, and they will move. So it's just that, sorry, to keep it compact, I like very much the experience, and I wish I will know more about the experience you mentioned in the Netherlands, because it was exactly also on the same vein what I wanted to highlight. In France, we know that the small cities, les villes intermédiaires, so intermediate cities, they suffer a lot. They suffered a lot because they lack attractive center town, and they build supermarket in the outskirts with a lot of peri-urbanization, a lot of car use there. But there could be a new way to look at them if they are connected by high speed, and we have a high-speed train in France, and they are connected. So this is places, what did I say? Human-sized cities.
Yeah.
And it's very, very similar to what you mentioned. It's an hypothesis we have that these cities could gain a new attractiveness because people can, because we look at the announce for new homes and the markets for the home market, but it could also benefit to these intermediate city, medium cities. So it could give them a new attractiveness, as I said. So I'm very happy for you to develop this point, which I wanted to raise as well. Sorry, Andrea, just to react on this.
Thank you. Yes, I think the idea of polycentric cities, to use a synthetic term to define what we have been discussing in the last 5 minutes. I think what would be interesting is to understand whether, because once again, the concept of polycentric cities has already been discussed and put forward, but I have the impression that again, it was looked at with the prism, once again, of efficiency. So polycentric cities are more efficient. Now, what is coming out of this quick discussion with you is that polycentric cities could also be a model to reduce transport injustice. And I think this is what I would be interested in further exploring and investigating. If it's not only a means to increase efficiency once again, although in a possibly more noble way, but also that it can have a significant impact on inequalities and transport injustice. I think this is what one of the things that I'm drawing from the last 10 minutes of discussion. Christina, you wanted to comment on that?
I mean, you come back to a point that has been also in my mind for a long time. So that is the issue of efficiencies versus fairness. That is an economic pattern. Mm. I mean, we have to go back to the social services that must remain public. I mean, you cannot privatize everything because the privatization is going only towards efficiency. And there are some that are also attentive and aware and careful for the fairness of their services, but it is more difficult to balance. Mm. So I really think, I'm sorry, maybe there is an old-fashioned way of thinking that is somewhere close to the welfare state. It's not really the welfare state, it's a service state. So you have to guarantee to people the basic services. And as mobility is one of the basic freedom of a human being, you have to guarantee mobility in the best possible way, in the most efficient way for the individual and the society. Efficient not in terms of productivity, but in terms of comfort, accessibility, affordability. These are, for me, the concepts that must remain important.
I think this this discussion also on value of time reflects heavily, or should reflect heavily, on the way in which policies and projects are assessed, because we all know that the value of time is a key element in whatever transport infrastructure project. Often used as the key to demonstrate that it is beneficial, or on the other hand, non-beneficial. But as long as we put a price tag on the value of time, which is solely related to efficiency, I mean, it doesn't work. Even in social cost-benefit analysis, there is a significant attempt in accounting for values that are not directly monetizable, how do you say, translated into economic terms. Even in social cost-benefit analysis, when it comes to value of time, the parameters for and the rules of the game for putting a price tag in the cost-benefit analysis for value of time are related to how productive is the time, and this is,
or how quick is the transport. I mean, I'm still astonished by the target of the aircraft industry for 2050 to have all possible movements to A to B in Europe within 4 hours. Why? For whom? How many people are interested to move from Athens to Helsinki in 4 hours door to door? Me, you, if we work, maybe. Maybe 5% of the population in Europe. So where is the efficiency? Is the efficiency of an industry that shows that can go faster, but there is no benefit really for the rest of the society. And I think that resources should be spent more on the day-to-day activities for the 95% of the population than on these elite issues.
Okay, now you already touched upon it, Cristina, but I wanted to also raise the issue because we've discussed value of time, and I think it would be interesting also to have a similar discussion on the value of space, which is another major ingredient. So clearly, the fact that again the pandemic has accelerated, at least if not generated much. Very significant changes in that area, because the fact that, putting it bluntly, that people have to work from home means that they might aspire to have more space at home. Very, very simply said. So the big question here is this something structural? Is this something that is here to stay, or is it only a temporary transition effect of the shock of the pandemics, and we will go back to largely to previous models? You have already somehow hinted at possible options here when you said commuting, yes, but maybe not every day. So something in between. Having said that, if you have to work from home, it is undoubtable that you need more space, so you might aspire to different space. So I was trying to devise two extreme options. As usual, they are extreme, so probably the reality is going to be somewhere in between. But let me ask you to dig out your crystal ball from your drawers and try to tell me what do you think will happen. So the first option, I would grossly describe it as okay, remote work, I'm not using smart, Christina.
Thank you.
Remote work is definitely here to stay. Virtual life is here to stay. It is a massive phenomenon which is irreversible to a very large extent. And therefore, this will lead to the need for redesigning our space and logistics available also in order to ensure an acceptable level of comfort and efficiency, of course, in the medium long term. This would mean that real estate market undergoes a major structural change with the residential space in higher demand and office space possibly in less demand. I mean, we're experiencing it even at a very small scale level. We're starting wondering whether we need all that office space in our company now that many of us work maybe not every day, but often from home. So that's something which can be extremely significant. On the other hand, the opposite scenario is that, okay, there have been confinements, lockdowns, people have lived through it, most of them at least, but the lesson learned is that we don't like that model and that we cannot and do not want to give up some of the advantages of physical presence and sharing more than a Zoom teleconference with the conviviality on the top of the list of our aspirations. And in that case, of course, remote work and remote education would not disappear, but would be limited to really the essential dimension. The majority of people would somehow be content with slightly readjusting their availability of space and their patterns of using space. So, crystal ball. Alain, you want to start with your crystal ball? Where are we heading?
Modestly, I mean, if you allow me, Andrea, I go to continue the discussion because Andrea, you are introducing a lot of ideas in the discussion. Just I wanted to come back to a question by Frank Smith. And maybe to continue the discussion, Frank said about the value, because you also emphasized the value of travel time, which is something really structuring our discussion today. And Frank asked, in what I said about the evolution of the value of travel time, what does it say about the fact that through history and at possibly the Roman period, the Roman Empire, the old Rome, we observed a constant travel time, the Zahavi law. So what does it say? In my crystal ball, what I see in my crystal ball would be that that could be a complete separation of society in those two branches, where we would have the people who would live differently and people who would continue living in the same way. And because if I think the idea that we spend this, we in general spend the same time commuting every day throughout history, this could change, because if we do need to, if some of us don't need to commute every day, if we commute once or twice a week, we possibly will have a different approach to this commuting, and we could accept maybe longer commute. So it was just a reply to Frank Smith, and then maybe to come to to the discussion about the two alternatives you propose, and maybe it would be a combination of, in my crystal ball I see a combination of both, and maybe another idea is what we observed pre-pandemic was in agglomerations. We observed less cars, but more traffic jams. So what how come could we have less cars and more traffic jams? And the reason for less cars and more traffic jam is less cars traveling more, which means peri-urbanization process continuing and less people using their car in the center and in the first suburbs. That was the trend, but more people traveling longer distances, generating more kilometers on the road, so more traffic jam. So it's just the possibility, if these trends could continue, would be that we could have. I had a question. It's people from the CEREMA, so it's not a research. It's more close to the politician, to the policymakers, and to the urban managers. And they say, okay, maybe we will have remote work, but if everybody needs to be, and we will find days where you will have to be at office, and if these days are the Thursdays and not the Wednesday. So if it's always the same days in the week where you will need to be there, we will have to keep all the office space, all the public transport infrastructure, all the road transport infrastructure with the good dimensions to allow for this special day in the week. So there is a possibility where we will have everything we have with worse conditions, especially on these days. So it's just a reflection and not an answer at all. But yeah, my view would be a combination of these two alternatives, yes. So people who will afford or who will choose, or who will choose to those very long commutes, and the others who will be forced to keep their low quality of life and still experience traffic jams or difficulty to reach their locations, their place of work.
Thank you, Anna. Christina, before I give you the floor, I think that Frank's question on the so-called Zahavi conjecture, the ones that assign the constant time of travel, irrespective of everything. Again, this is probably something. It's probably time to question it. It's probably time to question it and to wonder whether, again, this all these wealth of studies which have somehow demonstrated that it is a constant are based again on the premise that moving around is mainly assessed in terms of its value according to the paradigm of efficiency. And this is not just a methodology for measuring it. It is an ideological premise. So if we change the premise, maybe the results of the assessment, maybe, I don't know, I don't have the crystal ball here, but I think it's time we question the validity of the assumptions behind the studies, not of the studies themselves, because based on those assumptions, the studies which you mentioned, Frank, are absolutely correct, but maybe the premises behind them should be questioned. Christina.
I have my crystal ball. And as you see, inside it, there are many pieces of many colors. Because I think that indeed the future is a combination of different things. Is a combination of both schemes you mentioned earlier, is a combination of different kinds of work. As you said, people that can work remotely and people that cannot. And is also a question, and let me wear again my unionist dress, is a question of different contracts. Because you cannot have the same contract type as you have now if you have to work at home or if you have to change your way of working. So yes, you need a crystal ball for that, because I think that, and things are still changing every day. Things are still adjusting. Of course, the pandemic, but I mean, I refer also to the previous time of the pandemics. In the European Commissions, we were supported to work 1 or 2 days remotely from home to reduce the traffic in the city. So that is already a trend, and that is independent from the pandemic. The pandemic has shown that it is possible. It works. You can do a lot of things without moving, really. And so that includes another aspect, because we always talk about mobility, but I think that we should also consider mobility together with immobility. Mm-hmm. So, because there is a choice now. You can be mobile or not. And it has an influence on the transport system in both cases. So I don't have any answer, of course, Andrea, you can imagine it, although I have a crystal ball. But I think that that is the direction in which we have to start researching and studying new things, are exactly in this respect, because things are changing now, and you cannot have the same assumptions you had before. And it is important not to leave the lead to technology, because technology has to be steered at a, let's say, political level, because technology is not fair per se. It can help fairness if you use the technology in a certain way. So we have to be extremely cautious from the fact that internet, autonomous cars, teleworking, communication, whatever you want, allows certain things. We always have to question, what do they allow, for the benefit of whom, and for the deep benefit of who others, because there is always somebody that pays.
No, I think it's interesting. Also, I was looking at the other two questions that have been put. It looks really like the real issue here is the discrepancy, or at least the non-consistency between individual and collective values. The recognition of the value of the common goods, the recognition of the value of activity. That's an interesting question about the fact that COVID has somehow underlined the fact that there is a whole range of working activities which we cannot do without, and which are constrained in terms of their mobility patterns, because they have to actually put their hands on the product that they are. I'm talking about, you know, manual labor-based activities, and these are unavoidable. Of course, there's 3D printing, but it's a long way before we can rely on 100% 3D printed production, hopefully. And also the recognition more generally, more broadly, of the priority that should be given to common goods, as opposed to the priority of individual or selected socioeconomic groups. I think this is really something which seems to be emerging very forcefully from this whole debate, whether we're talking about value of time, value of space, or whatever. It seems to be a recurrent topic, and I'm quite thrilled by that. Okay, we have 5 more minutes, and I would like to give you a last very quick chance of saying your latest last word. The question I wanted to ask, but you're free to answer that, or to say a few last words of your own. The question I wanted to ask is basically, if we forget, in line with what Christina just said, if we put aside, not forget, but put aside the technological developments, which are crucial, but this is not the core of our reflection here. So if we put aside technological aspects for a while, which would you say are the real cultural factors that will prove more critical in determining future patterns of living, working, and shopping? Where do we have to find the key factors beyond technology? So I would give you 1 or 2 minutes each before we close the session. Christina, you want to start?
I think that there is the differences in needs and wishes between generations. So we have an aging society that is facing a new generation that has completely different behaviors. So I mean, to have to balance the needs of these two big parts of the population, two important parts of the population, will be an issue. The other one, I think, is that digitalization, but not in the sense of technology. I think digitalization that has brought a sort of remote behavior. So there is a mental attitude that you can shop remotely, you can work remotely, you can meet people remotely, will have an impact. And that is really a cultural, it is technology driven, but it's a cultural impact. And the last one, and I think that is becoming quite important, is the environmental consciousness. The sustainability. I prefer to talk about sustainability more than environmental only, because sustainability, as I told you, for me is a triangle. So I think that this consciousness that we have to do something for our planet, for our collectivity, for ourselves, is gaining place. I hope so. It seems so. I mean, the younger generation is bringing that quite to the first page every day. So I hope that this will change a little bit. So I think these three elements may be the change drivers in the future.
Thank you, Christina. Anna, your turn.
Yes, thank you, Christina. No, I don't want to be the one to conclude, Andrea. I expect Christina, if you want. No, it's just a remark. Maybe I fully sympathize with what Christina said about technology. At the same time, when we think a little bit, when we think of what technology, the role of technology in our societies, I mean, it's technology and society is a single in the single entity. It's not something you can separate. You can say you have society on one side, you have technology on the other. The technology is in our pockets. So I don't oppose what you say, but it's just maybe to express it a little bit differently, is we need maybe more conscious, more awareness of what is the impact of those technologies. It's just a different way to express it, maybe. Because technology is so rooted. And I also refer to the remark by Yannick Cornet in the chat, in the questions, and he says, from my understanding, because it's difficult to discuss, listen, and read all the same time. But he said many people, okay, we observe what Christina says. Some young people, young voices that express, okay, this awareness for climate issues. We also hear about a lot of people who are reacting differently on the pandemic, resisting and expressing very different things. People suspicious about this idea of the common good. In the name of common good, are you reducing my own freedom? So the debate is there, and I have no answer. I'm a modest researcher, and I will only come back to this idea of awareness, and we should dedicate effort to and the effort will be complete, because if I take my white blues and I say, I could imagine to tell people, this is how you should behave and I use the word behave and not okay. This is how you should behave for the planet, but I'm afraid this is not working. This won't work in our society. And the ways to educate people and to raise awareness at all levels I don't see another alternative to this.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, actually, on this issue of awareness, which is another one of the topics that has popped up systematically over the past 1.5 hours, I think awareness is the first step of a ladder. It has to breed cultural change. If awareness remains at the level of, I would say, superficial awareness, it doesn't serve the ultimate purpose of radically changing aspirations, models. Awareness is good when it becomes a reflex. When you change immediately, even when you formulate the problem in different terms, when then it becomes a cultural change. And I think this is what we should go for. So of course, like I said, awareness is fundamental, and I can only agree with what you've said, both of you, on awareness, but it's only the first step of a ladder. If we're talking about culture, about values. I always make the example, and let me have the final word on this, of my own daughter, who clearly thinks in terms of environment in a completely different way than we used to do so when we were her age. And this is the result of a long process of education, which breeds awareness and which breeds changing reflexes and changing attitudes at the outset. So I think this is what we should go for. And maybe at that time, we won't need any more crystal ball to know which model and which urban model we're going for. Who knows? Christina, thank you ever so much. And thanks also for our audience for having listened and asked a number of questions. I'm personally very happy about how this went. I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did, and we'll of course post the recording of this on the project website as on the others. And most importantly, we will try to draw from your insights, immediate and well thought inputs for our scenario building step, which is coming in a few weeks now. Thank you again for being with us. For this lively discussion, and we'll meet again, I'm sure. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you again. Bye. Thank you from my side as well to Alain for the very nice discussion, and to Andrea for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Christina.
Has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Andrea and Christina. I enjoyed a lot. I hope the audience.
Me too. Me too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.